KLM 805 and Pan Am 1736. It was March 27, 1977, a day that would mark the deadliest accident in aviation history. KLM Flight 4805, a Boeing 747 leaving Amsterdam, was headed for the sunny skies of Gran Canaria. But when a bomb threat shut down Las Palmas Airport, it was diverted to the small island of Tenerife. Fully fueled for the return trip, the giant jet sat waiting on the crowded tarmac. At the same time, Pan Am Flight 1736, a Boeing 747 from Los Angeles with a stop in New York, was also forced to land at Tenerife. The tiny airport was suddenly swarming with planes that were never meant to be there. By afternoon, a thick, heavy fog rolled in. The pilots could barely see a few hundred feet ahead. Ground control had no radar to track where the planes were. KLM's crew, eager to take off before their duty hours ran out, misunderstood a crucial instruction: stand by for takeoff. Believing they were cleared, the massive aircraft began rolling down the runway. But ahead, hidden in the fog, Pan Am's jumbo jet was still taxiing, trying to find its exit. In seconds, the two planes were on a collision course. Neither could see. The KLM jet lifted briefly, its nose clearing Pan Am's, but its belly and engines ripped through the other plane's fuselage. The KLM aircraft slammed back onto the runway in a fireball. All 248 people aboard KLM were killed instantly. On Pan Am, 335 of the 396 passengers perished. Just 61 made it out alive. Investigators pointed to KLM's premature takeoff as the main cause, made worse by the fog, unclear radio wording, pressure, and fatigue. From this tragedy came lasting changes: stricter communication protocols, assertive crew training, and ground radar systems, measures written in the hope that nothing like Tenerife would ever happen again. But history would prove that deadly fog collisions were far from over. SAS Flight 686 and Cessna CJ2. On October 8, 2001, Linate Airport in Milan was covered in thick fog. Visibility had dropped to less than 656 feet. Pilots and controllers had to rely completely on radio instructions because they could barely see what was ahead. Scandinavian Airlines Flight 686, a McDonnell Douglas MD-87, was preparing to depart for Copenhagen with 104 passengers and 6 crew members. At the same time, a small Cessna Citation CJ2 business jet operated by Air Evex was ready for a private trip to Paris with 2 pilots and 2 passengers. Flight 686 was cleared for takeoff. The MD-87's engines roared as it raced down the runway, quickly reaching more than 170 miles per hour. But somewhere ahead in the fog, the Cessna had mistakenly entered the same runway. Its pilots were lost and could not see where they were going. 53 seconds after the takeoff clearance, the two planes met. The MD-87 struck the Cessna at full speed, tearing it apart instantly. The collision destroyed the MD-87's right engine and badly damaged its landing gear, but the pilots tried to lift off. The aircraft climbed about 40 feet before losing control. Seconds later, it crashed into a baggage handling building at the end of the runway. The impact caused an explosion and a fire that destroyed the structure. Everyone on both planes died, along with 4 airport workers inside the building. Investigators found it was not one single mistake, but a chain of failures. Linate had no working ground radar. Taxiway signs were faded and confusing. Alarm systems were turned off. Air traffic control instructions did not match the ground markings. The Cessna's pilots were not certified to operate in such poor visibility. This was not the last time thick fog would set the stage for disaster. Nearly 2 decades later, in Milan, another airport without proper ground radar would face a similar tragedy. Iberia Flight 350 and Aviaco Flight 134. It was a foggy morning at Madrid Barajas Airport. Visibility was so low that pilots could barely see the taxiways ahead. Iberia Flight 350, a Boeing 727 carrying 84 passengers and 9 crew, was preparing for its journey to Rome. The aircraft was cleared for takeoff from runway 01. Its engines roared and the jet began accelerating down the runway. Elsewhere on the airfield, Aviaco Flight 134, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 with 37 passengers and 5 crew, was making its way toward the runway for its departure to Santander. But in the thick fog, the DC-9 crew made a wrong turn. Without realizing it, they entered the same runway that the 727 was already speeding down. Inside the Boeing's cockpit, the crew suddenly saw the shadowy outline of another aircraft ahead. They tried to lift off early to avoid it, pulling back on the controls, but the jet was not yet at flying speed. The 727's tail section slammed into the DC-9, ripping through its fuselage. Both planes burst into flames. The DC-9 was destroyed instantly, killing all 42 people on board. On the 727, 51 of the 93 passengers and crew lost their lives. Somehow, 42 people survived, many with serious injuries escaping through the burning wreckage. The investigation revealed a chain of problems. The dense fog had made visibility nearly impossible. The airport's taxiway signs and ground markings were worn and unclear. With no advanced ground guidance systems in place, The DC-9's crew had no visual cues to prevent them from entering the wrong path. But as the years passed, it became clear that danger wasn't limited to fog. Even on a clear night at one of America's busiest airports, one wrong instruction from air traffic control could lead to another catastrophic collision. U.S. Air Flight 1493 and SkyWest 5569. It was the night of February 1st, 1991, at Los Angeles International Airport. U.S. Air Flight 1493, a Boeing 737-300, was nearing the end of a long journey that began in Syracuse, New York, with stops in Washington, D.C. and Columbus, Ohio. It was on its final leg from Los Angeles to San Francisco. On the ground, SkyWest Flight 5569, a small Fairchild square-engine metroliner, was preparing for a short flight to Palmdale, California. The night was clear but filled with bright airport lights. The SkyWest plane was told to taxi onto runway 24L and hold its position. Moments later, the 737 was cleared to land on the very same runway. The controller, busy handling other air traffic and confused after misplacing paperwork, gave both planes instructions that would put them on a deadly collision course. The U.S. Air jet touched down at high speed, its pilots unaware that the metroliner was directly ahead. In seconds, the larger aircraft slammed into the smaller one, crushing it beneath its fuselage. The impact sparked a fire that quickly spread. Both planes skidded off the runway and crashed into an airport fire station. Flames engulfed the wreckage. On the 737, 3 of the 6 emergency exits were blocked by fire, forcing passengers to scramble toward the remaining exits in a desperate fight to escape. All 12 people aboard the metroliner were killed instantly. On the 737, 23 passengers lost their lives, many trapped by the intense fire and evacuation delays. Investigators determined the main cause was an air traffic control error. The controller lost track of the SkyWest plane and failed to follow safety procedures. The FAA's lack of oversight at LAX was also blamed. As a result, the NTSB urged that takeoffs and landings at the airport be separated onto different runways to prevent another tragedy. United Express Flight 5925. On November 19, 1996, Quincy Municipal Airport in Illinois was quiet, with no control tower to guide traffic. United Express Flight 5925, a Beechcraft 1900C operated by Great Lakes Aviation, was finishing its route from Chicago O'Hare with a stop in Burlington, Iowa. On board were 10 passengers and 2 crew members. At the same time, a private Beechcraft King Air A90 with 2 pilots was getting ready to take off for a short flight. The problem was their runway, 4, crossed directly over runway 13, where Flight 5925 was about to land. Flight 5925 touched down and began rolling along the runway. Just moments later, the King Air started its own takeoff roll on the intersecting runway. Neither crew could see the other in time. The 2 aircraft met at the intersection in a violent collision. The Beechcraft 1900C skidded over 100 feet before coming to rest. The crash was survivable for some, but within moments, fire began to spread. Passengers tried to escape, but the main stair door was jammed from the damage. 6 pilots from nearby planes rushed over to help, but the door would not budge. Flames consumed both aircraft and smoke filled the cabin. All 14 people on board the 2 planes died, most from smoke inhalation. The investigation found that the King Air pilots failed to properly monitor the common radio frequency or keep watch for other aircraft, leading them to take off while Flight 5925 was landing. A radio transmission from another aircraft also caused confusion, making the United Express crew believe the King Air would wait. Comair Flight 5191. It was the early morning of August 27, 2006, at Bluegrass Airport in Lexington, Kentucky. Comair Flight 5191, a Bombardier Canadian regional jet operated under the Delta Connection name, was ready to fly to Atlanta. On board were 47 passengers and 3 crew members. The first officer was flying the aircraft. In the darkness before sunrise, the crew was cleared for takeoff from runway 22, a strip over 7,000 feet long, suitable for their jet. But during the taxi, they accidentally turned on to runway 26 instead. This runway was barely 3,500 feet long and had no centerline lights. It was meant for small planes, not a fully loaded regional jet. Unaware of the mistake, the pilots pushed the throttles forward. The jet sped down the short runway, engines at full power. But there was not enough distance to reach the speed needed for takeoff. The aircraft blasted past the runway's end, broke through a fence, tore across a grassy field, and smashed through trees. The impact shattered the plane, and fire quickly spread through the wreckage. Of the 50 people on board, only the first officer survived. The investigation revealed that the crew had failed to confirm their exact position before takeoff, missing the signs and markings that could have warned them. They engaged in non-essential conversation during the taxi, breaking the sterile cockpit rule meant to ensure full attention during critical phases of flight. This casual approach caused them to lose situational awareness. The FAA's procedures at the time also allowed planes to cross multiple runways without a separate clearance for each, adding to the confusion. Aeroflot Flight 3352. On October 11, 1984, a routine passenger flight turned into one of the worst disasters in Soviet aviation history. Aeroflot Flight 3352, a Tupolev Tu-154B1, was flying from Krasnodar to Novosibirsk with a scheduled stop in Omsk. On board were 170 passengers, including families, children, and teenagers, along with several experienced crew members and cargo. The weather over Omsk was poor. Light rain and mist reduced visibility, but nothing unusual for the pilots. As the aircraft approached, maintenance vehicles were sent onto the runway to dry its surface. In the control tower, the ground controller, responsible for keeping the runway safe, fell asleep. He did not inform the approach controller that the runway was occupied, nor did he tell the maintenance crew to clear it. Unaware of the danger, the Tupolev's pilots landed at normal speed, about 150 miles per hour. As they touched down, the dark shapes of vehicles appeared ahead in the rain. The captain tried to swerve, but there was no time. The aircraft slammed into the trucks, ripping open fuel tanks and erupting in a massive fire. The cockpit section broke away, and 4 crew members inside survived with minor injuries. 1 passenger also lived through the crash. Everyone else, 174 people on board and 4 ground workers, died in the flames. The investigation left no doubt this was not a random accident. It was the result of shocking negligence and broken procedures. The ground controller's fatigue, the decision to send vehicles onto an active runway without supervision, and the complete lack of communication created the perfect conditions for disaster. Japan Airlines Flight 516 and JCG-8. On January 2, 2024, Japan Airlines Flight 516, an Airbus A350, was on a routine domestic trip from New Chitose Airport near Sapporo to Tokyo's Haneda Airport. On board were 367 passengers and 12 crew members. At the same time, a Japan Coast Guard -8 aircraft callsign Mizunagi-1 was preparing to depart from Niigata. Its mission was urgent. It was carrying relief supplies for victims of the Noto Peninsula earthquake. As the A350 descended toward Haneda, the -8 began moving toward the runway. Air traffic control had cleared the Airbus to land, but the -8 had only been told to hold short of the runway. In the fog of radio chatter, the Coast Guard captain later claimed he believed he was cleared for takeoff. The transcripts, however, show no such clearance. The phrase "number 1" may have been misunderstood, contributing to the confusion. Seconds later, the worst happened. The A350 touched down and slammed into the -8, which had entered the active runway. The collision tore into the smaller aircraft, killing 5 of its 6 crew members instantly. The captain of the -8 survived with serious injuries. The Airbus erupted in flames, but its crew moved fast. Within minutes, all 379 people on board were evacuated. Passengers slid down emergency chutes as thick smoke filled the cabin. The survival of everyone on the A350 was nothing short of extraordinary. Investigators quickly focused on miscommunication and human error. The -8 had not been given takeoff clearance, yet ended up on the runway. Rescue efforts were also examined, as delays and low staffing slowed the emergency response. LATAM Airlines Peru Flight 2213. On November 18, 2022, at Jorge Chávez International Airport in Lima, Peru, a regular domestic flight turned into a scene of chaos and fire. LATAM Airlines Peru Flight 2213, an Airbus A320neo carrying 102 passengers and 6 crew, was ready to take off for Juliaca. It was just a normal day until it wasn't. As the aircraft raced down runway 16, gaining speed for takeoff, something unthinkable happened. An airport fire truck suddenly crossed right in front of it. This wasn't an accident in the traditional sense. The fire crew was taking part in a planned emergency drill, but no one in the cockpit expected to see a massive vehicle appear on the active runway at that very moment. The pilots reacted instantly, trying to abort the takeoff, but at such high speed, avoiding the collision was impossible. The impact tore the jet's right engine clean off, shattered the right landing gear, and sent the plane sliding off balance. Flames erupted as the aircraft scraped along the ground, finally coming to rest nearly 1.5 miles down the runway, tipped onto its right wing. Inside, panic and smoke filled the cabin. But remarkably, everyone on board survived. 40 people were injured, 4 seriously. Tragically, 2 firefighters in the truck were killed instantly, and a third died from injuries months later. The investigation revealed a string of failures. Peru's airport authority, CORPAC, had planned the drill poorly, with little coordination. The control tower had only been told about it an hour beforehand. Standard aviation communication protocols weren't followed, and crucially, the fire truck never had clear permission to enter the runway.